Good evening, my beautiful people. How we are doing? I hope we are all doing well. We thank God for all our lives. We thank God for sustenance. We thank God for keeping us down to this moment. Okay, so now there is something else that is on the table, and there's something else we are going to look into, and it's going to be very detailed, probably long, but it's also going to be very important. Now, the topic exactly is the Roman Empire and the Igbo people of Agbor, Ukwuani, and others. That is the topic. Now you may hear the topic and say, okay, our Agbor, Ukwuani, and the rest of them, what do they have to do with the Roman Empire? Well, we are going to actually break it down right here and right now, and everything is going to be laid there. There's one issue with Igbo history. For one reason or the other, I take it that it's actually educational issues in the Nigerian space. This part of Igbo history that goes way back is not investigated most of the time. It's left to conjecture. People just try to guess and say, okay, this is probably what it was like. First of all, we are going to look at the introduction to this topic. In this topic, we are going to be discussing migratory patterns in Igboland. We're also going to be looking at how Igboland was settled. There are also certain Igbo words that we'll be looking at, as it has to do with the contact the Igbo people had with the Roman Empire. And also we are going to be looking at peculiar practices in the Igboland of old. Practices that most modern people today do not even know that Igbo people were doing in the past. The first part of this we will look at is the word Dein and Umudei. Those two words, Dein and Umudei. Now, the word Dein and Umudei, these are words that you get more among these aforementioned communities, that is Agbor, Ukwuani, and most of the Western Igbo area. Day is a word that you get in these areas. You get a lot of communities, Umudei here, Umudei there. And there's usually one common denominator across most of these Umudei communities, and that is the fact that they are usually connected with royalty. Whenever it is in the form of a lineage, the Umudei lineage is usually the ones that produce like the leaders or kings of those communities. Now you have Umudei across Agbor. They call them Umudein. You see the word day becomes Dein in Agbor, probably due to nasalization. It appears that the Agbor people have a heavier nasalization, and so they add the sound after the day, so it becomes day. So you have Umudei in Agbor. In Ogwashiuku there's Umudei. In Onitsha there's also Umudei. In Uguta you get Umudei. In Agbor there's the Umudei lineage. You know, the Obi of Agbor is actually from the Umudei lineage, and that is where the kings of Agbor have always been from. There's someone who mentioned that there's also Umudei in Ogba part of River State, but I'm not sure about that. Now, you also look at the word Dein of Agbor. They use the word to refer to king. Now, you look into the root of the word. From this point on, it becomes very interesting, because this is something that people don't really realize. Now, you look into the root of that word Day. Day is actually the Roman word some people know, not everybody. Day is actually the Roman word you know for God. The name for God among the Romans of old was Day. But you see, something else happened along the way, and so you have that word now imported into the dialect of the Agbor people and the rest of them around there. Now, how did this come to play? How did the word come in? And how come the word is used for king? Now, this part of the whole thing is also interesting. Why do I say so? Now, if you go back, or if you go into the history of Agbor, the Agbor history notes in some sources, not all sources, there are varying sources, but in some sources, the Agbor history notes that Agbor community goes way back to 1,500 years ago. They claim that the line of successorship of the kings and even the community, everything links back to 1,500 years ago. Now, when you go into history, there is something known as the Roman era of the Hebrew people, and this is where the whole thing actually took root from, that word day. Now, what happened in that Roman era? Between the years 63 BC and 70 AD, that was when the Romans started to actually impose their rule on the Hebrew people. Now, what is interesting about this era is also the fact that it is also the part of the Roman history where they started to refer to their kings as they. Prior to that time, they called them several names, Imperator and the rest of them. But in that Roman era, that was all is the time they started to name their kings day. It started with King Julius Caesar. They referred to him as a what? As a god. And so from imperator or Caesar or whatever, they started to refer to him as day. Okay. So it happens that in that same period also is also the period where the earliest ancestors of the Agbor people picked up that word, using it for their kings. Now, this Roman era between 63 BC to 770 AD, the Hebrew people were scattered severally in that era. The Romans were world powers of then, a solid world power. So it marks an area of brutalization of Hebrew people that forced many of them to leave. In fact, in 70 AD, Jerusalem, the place known as Jerusalem, was destroyed completely, and the Romans did not care. They don't care about whether it's a holy city or whatever. They destroyed it. They brought it down flat. So that era was characterized by brutalization. That era was also characterized by the era where they called their kings by the word day. And that era actually is the era when the earliest ancestors of the Agbor people, the Ukwuani people, and some of those others left the Israel area and found their way down to this part of the world, taking with them the word day and also some practices of the Roman people, because when cultures meet, obviously you are going to absorb some things. It's not going to be dry. It's not going to be a dry contact. You are definitely going to absorb some things. So aside from the word day, there was something else they absorbed, which we are going to look into shortly. But there is something else that one needs to take note of in all this. Now, as the elders of the Agbor people left that area between 63 BC and 70 AD, that's about 2,000 years ago. Mind you that in our previous research, we found out that parts of Igboland, especially the central part of Igboland and the northern part of Igboland, had already been established by 700 BC. Please take note of these dates. And that 700 BC is known as the Assyrian era. Assyrian, that was the era when what you know as Gad, the tribe of Gad, was scattered. Now, it is also interesting because the central part of Igboland, the northern part of Igboland, which we discovered in the last research, was already settled by 700 BC. It turns out that another population actually came into Igboland after that one, around that 63 BC. So that's a space of about 700 years. And that also informs us that Igboland was settled in different migrations. This is a part of Igbo research that has stayed at the level of hypothesis. Many people have hypothesized that the Igbo land was not settled in one migration. And this actually proves it. The fact that there were actually people that left the Israel area and came to Igboland area around 2,000 years ago shows that that is a second migration into Igboland, a second established migration into Igboland from the earlier one of 700 BC. So 700 years apart, so to say. So that is very key. That should be noted. But it is also key to note the fact that despite this 700 years gap, for whatever reason, the people who were pushed out in the Roman era, they were able to find themselves, in one way or the other, to find themselves in this part of the world, to come here and recognize their brothers that were already on ground. Now, there's one other point that needs to be noted, that the ones who were pushed out in the Assyrian era of 700 BC, being the tribe of Gad, and the ones who were pushed out from the Roman era were mostly people from Judah. So you see a difference in the tribes, but all were the same ethnic stock. And so the ones that were pushed out in the Roman era found their way to this part of the land and met their brothers who had been lost for 700 years. And so they took that word day, and that is why that day is more commonly used in the western area. When you go to other parts of Igboland, the word becomes less used. Sometimes the word disappears entirely. You don't even get it in some Igbo dialects, in the southeast at all. Meanwhile, once you cross to the western Igbo side, you get the word day. It becomes more common, which shows that there is a difference somewhere. There is a difference somewhere, and we have been able to identify that difference as a gap in the migration of both people, though they are the same people. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there were other practices that they brought to Igboland, which we are going to look into here. And one of the practices they picked up from the Romans, aside from the name day, is the practice of crucifixion. Yes, you heard that word, crucifixion. You see, because of the history is not well documented or not well read or something, People do not know that crucifixion was still on in parts of Igboland till just 140 years ago. Many people do not know that some parts of Igbo land were crucifying people up to just 140 years ago. It happened. You see, if you go into this record, of course, we will always look into the record. If you go into this record, this one was taken around the 1840s. And this one is actually talking about the Obani people. The Obani people on the coast, you see, related to the Ungwa people, the Undoki people, and some other people in the hinterland. Okay. Now, this is a record of King Pepo actually crucifying one of his slaves who he accused of stealing. He accused the slave of actually stealing biscuits, the British biscuits that were brought from him from Britain. He accused the slave of having stolen them, and so he had the slave crucified. His back was put to the wooden platform. It's called a cask. It's like a barrel. Okay, so his back was put to it. His both hands stretched, and you can see what they call the nails. They called it ten a penny, so to say. And so they stretched out the slave's hands on both sides of the wooden platform and nailed him there. This is a description taken from Obani in the 1840s. Counting back, that is almost 200 years now. So these things were actually in practice. Also, still in Obani of that era, this is recorded that some of the prisoners, if they don't want them to run away, when they are crossing them from one place to the other on the river or on the sea, in order for them not to run away, they take the hands of these prisoners and nail them to the sides of the boat. These are practices that was actually imbibed from the contact with Romans by Western Igboland and brought into other parts of Igboland. Now, if you look at this record also, this one was taken around the 1870s, 1880s. This was an ethnographer. She studies ethnic groups. She said, I have witnessed punishment here. He was still talking about Obani. I have witnessed punishment here where they take part of the ears as a punishment, or crucifixion. The slaves are what? Crucified. Their arms are spread in any wooden platform they can find or a tree, and they nail the hands there. They nail you there for days or hours, depending on how annoyed the master is. These are practices found among the Igbo people. Now, while I was also researching, I also got a hint that this was practiced in the among the old Abreba people. But the problem was that the book where it is found, Abreba Peoples and Culture, I couldn't get my hands on it. But there was a reference, there was a citation that says that the Abreba people were also practicing this in their time. These were the practices they imbibed from the Romans, because in that Roman era, more than 250,000 people were crucified. It was a daily occurrence. Of course, you know the one in the Bible where Jesus Christ himself was crucified. They crucified people for fun in the Roman era of 63 BC to 70 AD. Also, it was recorded also that the crucifixion was taken from Western Igboland into what you know as the Benin Kingdom. If you go through the records of the Benin Kingdom, you will see it. I will try to screenshot some of them. You will see that crucifixion was being done, although not in the exact way that the Igbos were doing theirs. That is to tell you how common this was in Igboland of old. But today you don't hear such things, because by the time Christianity came in, they forced the Igbo people, they told them, look, you people have to stop this. This is not a good practice. It is from that era, 63 BC to 70 AD. In that era also, they picked the name Day. And that is why many other communities will go by the name Eze for king. But you see, that Western Igboland, especially Agbor, will go by the name Dein for their own king. It is fashioned after the Roman way of calling their kings. Dei, though with a nasalization and an N, called Dein. So you have in the name of communities Umudei here and there. Now, we'll go into the evolution of that word in the Igbo language, because that word has stayed in the Igbo language, but in several other forms that one may not really know is connected to the word day. Now, the most common appearance of that word day today is known as the word di. That word you know as di is actually an evolution from day, because the word day came to be known as king or high father. The word di means lord or master, so to say. It doesn't actually mean husband per se. And also that's why you have the name Di for God, that is master of the heavens. So the word day actually evolved and became Di But it didn't stop there also, because the title you know as Dim in some parts of the central Igbo area, there's a title, just as you have Dei Ogbuefi in the Onitsha history. There are titles today that you know as Dim. That word Dim is actually Deyemu, my Lord. But the evolution on the word, it became Dim, is actually Deyemu, contrasted to become Dim. But also the word continues to undergo evolution. That is, it changes gradually as it enters other parts of Igboland. It has been changing gradually. And so the same word day, when you go further down to southern part of Igboland and some further east in Igboland, that word day becomes day. The word you know as day is actually rooted in day. So it becomes day. The word at the earlier time used to be day, my Lord, my Lord. Evolution in the Igbo language usually make things shorter so that the speech is quicker. The message is passed quicker. So instead of day, the word has become contrasted to day today. The ending I is dropped. And so it becomes day. But it used to be day, my Lord, my Lord. And so you see, when you go to the far western side of Igboland, you still get the original word day as they collected it from the Romans. You still get it day. But as it goes into the central Igbo area, you get words like dim, so to say. Also, generally, the word evolved from day to d today. And so as you go further down into the south and into some part of Igboland, you now get words like day. The same word evolved as time goes on, from space to space to space across the Igboland. The same word evolving, the same usage. It's just that where the word originally came from, the word is used for their king. But as the word, as the word diffuses into parts of Igboland, it takes several other, it just changes form a bit, now taking the shape of D for master, so to say. Also taking the shape of Dim, also taking the shape of Day, which is a respected elder for your man. Day. And so this is how the whole history has actually gone. These are the things that you look at and you begin to understand the Igbo race, the Igbo identity from a whole new perspective. You also begin to understand and probably appreciate why the Igbos, most of the time, they show an inclination to some of these Western ideas. Not all, but they show an inclination to some of these Western ideas because from an earlier time, they've already been in contact with some of these people. And this just helps to build your understanding on a deeper level of the Igbo race and the Igbo identity. So this is where we'll be stopping this particular recording. We'll be talking about something else in another video. Thank you for listening.